In this video, we'll show you instructions on how to do block 4. We're ready to show you the supplies for block 4 for the Premier quilt. There are 3 different block 4s that we need to do for this quilt. We're going to show you the first one. Of course, you'll need your battleizer. I have this hooped up and ready to go. If you're going to use wool, we'll use that. We'll need your fabric 1, your fabric 2, your fabric 4, 5, and 6, and we'll need your backing fabric. We'll also use thread A with a bobbin, thread B with a bobbin, thread C and D, thread G, thread E and F with bobbins as well, plus we'll use the Vanish Light thread. Let's get stitching.
Okay, we just completed step 1 where we have a battleizer in the hoop and we've stitched a placement stitch, and we have neutral thread in the needle and embroidery bobbin thread in the bobbin, and stitch a placement stitch onto the battleizer. Step 2 is an optional step, and if you don't want to do this you can skip to step 3, but we like to add the additional wool batting, so we're going to show you how to do that. And what we have done is we have pressed the edges of our wool batting so that it lays nice and flat, and then we're going to go ahead and place it here right inside that placement stitch, and we're going to have water soluble thread in the needle and regular embroidery bobbin thread in the bobbin, and we're going to go ahead and stitch a zigzag stitch around the outside. I just kind of hold it in place here. I haven't had any shift on me yet, but I'm just in case, it wouldn't hurt. This will keep your embroidery foot from getting caught in the thick high loft wool batting.
So for step 3, I've gone ahead and laid my fabric 2 over my wool batting and put my water soluble thread in the needle and went ahead and stitched the tack down. So we're ready to trim this off. So if you notice, I have a little clip right here. I'm going to clip and leave the seam allowance available right there and just give this a scant 1/4 inch trim. And we'll do the same thing up here. Just cut it over like that. And we're ready to do step 4. This little cutoff we're going to save for another block 4 that we have that has a little white daisy in the corner. So we'll save this scrap and use that later on. So I've gone ahead and stitched step 4, water soluble thread still in the needle, and this is the placement area for step 5. So for step 5, we'll take our fabric 1 and we'll place it directly over this placement stitch, just like this, and we'll go ahead and tack that down. Here it is all trimmed up, and please notice we left this area here, the fabric, into the seam allowance on both sides. And now we are ready to go ahead and put thread B in the needle only, and it'll stitch some decorative stitching on top of this fabric. Step 7, we're going to place thread A in the needle only, and we'll stitch the satin stitch around the raw edge of the applique. For step 8, we'll put water soluble thread in the needle, and it'll stitch a placement stitch for our next applique. For step 9, we'll take our little square of fabric 4, place it over the placement stitch, put it back under the machine, and let the machine tack the fabric down. Time to go ahead and trim for applique. Using my mini hoop scissors, I'm going to trim really nice and close. So we'll get that finished and we'll be right back.
Okay, for step 10 we're going to take our fabric 5, which we've cut on a diagonal. Later on, I believe it's in step 14, you're going to be placing this, and it's going to be this corner section. But there is a little area that we will not be using, so you just take it and slide it right up here over this, because this is the applique that will take place for our step 10. So go ahead and place your fabric 5 like that over that placement stitch, and we're going to continue with the water soluble thread and sew the tack down stitches. So here's my tack down stitch sewn, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim right up close to that stitching, and remember that you're going to keep the leftover fabric 5 for step number 14, which will be down here in that corner. For step 11, you're going to place your thread G in the needle only, and we're going to sew a decorative stitch. For step 12, we're going to put thread D in the needle only, and we're going to stitch some more embroidery. For step 13, I'm going to place thread E in the needle only, and we are going to be sewing the little satin stitches around the orange center of that flower. For step 14, we're going to take that scrap of leftover fabric from step 5, and we're going to place it here in the corner, and with our water soluble thread we're going to sew a tack down stitch. And here is our block, how it's progressing. We have stitched our tack down stitch with water soluble thread in step 14. So now what I'll do is I'm going to trim this. I'm going to leave the 1/2 inch or so around the outside edges and trim about 1/8 of an inch inside the block. And as you get closer to the section over here, you can kind of bring it from 1/8 of an inch up to right about where the stitching is to trim it on right there, and also right on this edge. So here's what it looks like all trimmed up, and then we are going to continue with the water soluble thread, and it's going to sew some placement stitches. Okay, so I don't know how well you can see them, but there are little placement stitches right here in the corners, and that was step 15. For step 16, we're going to take scraps of our fabric 3, and we're going to place them right side up over those placement stitches, and it will sew a tack down stitch. So I have one larger piece here, so I'm just going to cut a couple smaller pieces out of this and place them there. And with water soluble thread still in the needle, we're going to go ahead and sew our tack down stitches. So here's our step 16 with our scraps of fabric 3 tacked down, and we're going to leave the fabric on the outside edge of the block. It'll get trimmed later when the block is complete. Right now I'm going to stitch right up close to the stitching on the areas that are on the inside of the block. For step 17, we're going to place our thread C in the needle only, and we're going to stitch some embroidery. And there's our completed step 17. For step 18, we're going to put thread E in the needle only and sew some more embroidery. So now we're on to step 19. For that step, you're going to put your water soluble thread in the needle only, and you're going to take your fabric 6 and you're going to lay it right side down over this area, and it's going to sew a tack down stitch. So here's our step 19 with our fabric stitched down, and now I'm going to trim it close to the stitching. So now I have the purple fabric all trimmed up right to the stitching, and we're going to continue with our water soluble thread. And this time what we're going to do is it's time to add our backing fabric. So we're going to flip our block over, and we're going to add our backing fabric, and just make sure that it's centered very nicely. You can use a temporary spray adhesive such as KK2000 or 505 spray if you'd like. I recommend spraying the back of your backing fabric like over a trash can or something so that you don't get any residue or anything on your hoop or your machine. But then with a water-soluble thread, it's going to stitch a basting stitch to hold the backing fabric on. So here's our completed step 20 with our backing fabric attached with water-soluble thread to the back of our hoop. And if we look at the front of our block, our next step, which is step 21, we're going to place thread F in the needle and also in the bobbin, and then it's going to sew some satin stitches and quilting around the edge of the purple swoop. Also, just a quick reminder before I begin sewing this, and you too, you need to do a needle down and a needle up to bring the bobbin thread to the top. And if you have an automatic thread cutter on your machine, you're going to want to turn that off, and that'll make for a much prettier looking back. And as on all our blocks, anytime you have the backing fabric, at that point, that's when you need to do those two very important steps. Alright, so now it's time to do step 22, and basically we're just going to put our thread A in the needle and also in the bobbin, and we're going to sew some quilting. Don't forget to do a needle down, needle up to bring your bobbin thread to the top, and of course your automatic thread cutter should be cut off too, so you have a very nice looking back to your quilt. So here's our completed step 22 with some of the quilting around in here. And then for step 23, we're going to take our thread E and place that in the needle and also in the bobbin, and we're going to do some more quilting down in this area. Okay, and for our final step on block 4, you're going to take, this is step 24, you're going to take your thread B and you're going to put it in the needle and also in the bobbin, and it's going to sew the quilting. So here's our completed block 4 in our 5-inch size. And basically what you're going to do is you're going to trim this block using the trimmer by George on all 4 sides. So I've already trimmed one side of this block 4, so I'm going to go ahead and use the trimmer by George to trim the other side just so you can see how it's used. The trimmer by George, we're going to take the metal edge and slide it in between the fabric on the front of the block and the battleizer. Make sure there's no fabric peeking out through there. And using a 60mm rotary cutter, go ahead and cut it away. You can see how it is on that side. I'm going to continue cutting around all 4 sides of this block, since all 4 sides in this case need to be trimmed. Using the trimmer by George. I think I need a new blade in my rotary cutter. Okay, so now I have all 4 sides trimmed using the trimmer by George. The only thing left to do would be to turn the trimmer by George over and use the ruler side. And here we're going to trim this 1/4 inch from the basting stitch on all 4 of these sides. Okay, and there is our completed block 4 on the right side and on the back side. You can see how the trimmer by George gets it really, really close and protects the fabric on the front of your block.